Quick show of hands, who was on the Hyrox webinar? Cool. So those that are on the Hyrox webinar, you will notice the same principles because we're talking about fitness racing. Same principles apply. However, what we can do today, after we've had our knuckle wrapped by a particular fitness racing competition that we're going to talk to, for whatever reason, who knows? We've made it more general. So we're talking about fitness racing in general. Hopefully all fitness racing owners won't gang up and tell us off. You try and do something nice. Apparently it challenges business. Here's me thinking we're all in this for the greater good of getting people fitter and enjoying fitness. Who knew? Who knows? Fucking daft. Just as you're coming in, folks, if you can have your cameras on, it'd be great. Just so I can speak to people rather than just speaking to my screen. If you can't, don't worry. So, there are some similarities to the Hyrox session, but the nature of what we're going to talk to is going to be different than Hyrox. We're talking about fitness racing generally. So we're talking about more mixed, okay? We're talking about tests that aren't fixed. So tests that are probably going to change competition to competition. So less of a like for like. Less known, more unknown, okay? And that's important. That's important for you as coach, and it's important for the client as well to sort of manage their expectations and manage their mindset around the competition. As we'll go into, it's important for you as a coach so that you can still prioritize the client's programming, okay? We have to try and have a stab at coming up with what's involved in these tests, whether that be a particular CrossFit competition. I don't even know if I can say that anymore. Fuck it, I'm there. A particular CrossFit competition, whether it's turf games, whether it's national fitness games, whether it's something in between, whatever it might be. As coaches, we should be doing our best to try and understand what that competition is, okay? So then the reverse engineering piece, functional volume required, generally speaking, movements involved, generally speaking, loads involved, generally speaking. Therefore, where does my client currently sit in relation to what's required? And manage expectations accordingly. So the big difference between this chat and Hyrox is that Hyrox is fixed. So everybody knows where they stand. Everybody knows what's required. Run a certain distance, shift a certain weight, shift your body in a certain way. 4 times, every single time. So that's the big difference in the chat today. Let me share my screen. Okay. So, as I was saying, what is the competition? That should be our starter as coaches. Now, chances are your clients aren't going to be clued up on this too much. They might be, depending on them, depending on their interest, depending on their experience. They might know all about it if they're that way inclined. But it's still our responsibility to go and find this stuff out. So if your client comes to you and says, I want to compete in this thing, it's up to us then to go and find out all about that thing in order to move our clients towards greater success within it. So what is the competition? So what is the event? What's it known for? Okay, so generally speaking, when you go on the website, the about page, top of the shop, what's it say? What's it known for? Is it mixed? Is it high skill? Is it low skill? Is it more inclusive, less inclusive, etc., etc.? Based on previous events, what are the time frames of the test? You should see some commonality depending on the makeup of the day from experience of running fitness competitions. Your hands are kind of tied to some extent when we're dealing with the masses. So when we're dealing with the general athletic population, because we're trying to get mass participation, we're trying to get as many people to enjoy this day as possible for two reasons. One, so that there's as many people enjoy it. Two, because it's good for cash. That's the reality. So then within that, when we're trying to get through a certain amount of heats, a certain amount of, so that the number of heats will be then watered down into how many people are in those heats. That will be dependent on kit availability, on space availability, etc., etc. Out of the back of that, then, whoever's program designing it will be set timeframes for each event in and around. So you'll be told this can be 10, 12 minutes, this can be 15 minutes, this can be 8 minutes, but it'll be generally speaking in and around sort of similar timeframes each event. All right. So you can start to see some patterns. So don't just think that, would my client's going doing this fitness racing event, it's varied, and so it's pointless trying to aim my capacity tests or strength tests or whatever at nothing. We'll just try and get good at everything. There are probably some commonalities. So what's it known for? What's the timeframes of the test? Generally speaking, what are the movements involved? So of course, when we get to CrossFit, we know what's involved. When we come to turf games, they say it on their website. It's lower skill than CrossFit. It's more inclusive. Okay. But there are particular movements involved. There tends to be a worm. There tends to be a dumbbell. There tends to be a rig. Loads involved. What do they generally look like? As far as the elements that are involved in the capacity tests. What sort of weights of dumbbells do they use? What sort of weights do the barbells tend to be? What sort of weights lead towards success in the strength tests based on previous years? And therefore, we can manage your client's energy accordingly. Can they compete at that top level or in that strength test? Or is the strength test something that you just do as good as you can in, but don't waste too much time training for? Because between 4, 5, or 6 tests through a day, there's usually only one strength test. So it's max 25% of the total score. The rest of the score is going to be capacity. So if your client isn't overly strong yet, might not be the end of the world. And it might not be that you put all your eggs in the strength basket just to get good at 25% of the competition, then flunk the other 75%. So think about that as well. What's the skill level required? So movements involved create in our mind as coaches then what we need to be working on with the client. Like, can they do them? And then that will link together with the skill level that's required. Are those movements higher skill, lower skill, somewhere in between? Can your client do them? Does your client have the skills? As we talk about in PFCA, all the way through the system. The first port of call for any new skill is motor control. So we have to grease the groove. We have to get the repetitions of the same thing in with low intensity. Sequencing without intensity, that's motor control. So has your client earned that? Have they earned the level of skill required for this particular competition? So as I said before, when we look at the difference between turf games, which is more inclusive, probably more general fitness and strength, there are some skill elements in it. But a lot of the things that are skill within the Metcon pieces, the efficiency is probably less important. You still throw a 22.5 kilo dumbbell around pretty quickly, even if you're doing a shit job of it, right? If the strength and the capacity is there. Can it be more efficient? Of course it can. But when you get into a CrossFit competition and you're doing 80 kilo power snatches, there's a requirement to just do like at that position, at that point, the iron doesn't lie. So what is the skill? And then the day, the event. Is it a single day? Is it 2 days? Is it 3 days? Again, we need to shape our program design and our training accordingly. That should fire up some questions in the mind. If it is a multi-day event, does the client have the resources to even train for a multi-day event? There's a lot of capacity required to do multiple tests over multiple days. And so have you got enough time between now and the event in order to develop said capacity? And B, do they have enough time in the week, not only to express themselves in the gym as is required to develop the capacity, but also to recover from it? When with just a note on the days, it would make sense in your program design that whenever the test is, or the tests are, you train on that day. So you get the rhythm in place. So if it's a Saturday all day, you train on Saturday generally. So the body's used to being challenged on a Saturday. Okay. And maybe in the week, that Saturday becomes a higher intensity piece, which is followed by a rest day on a Sunday. If it's a Saturday and Sunday competition, maybe you train Saturday, Sunday. Ideally. Maybe you take Friday and Monday as rest days and train Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday. So again, so that the body's rhythm is used to challenge on those 2 days. Fueling and recovery around that and all that goes with it. What's its definition? Generally speaking, for fitness racing competitions, it's a series of mixed, varied tests of strength, power, and metabolic capacity, generally speaking. Now, I know that sounds quite simple, but it's worth considering. All those elements. It's a series. So it's not one test. That in itself is a skill. The skill to repeat high level of expression within close succession. Do an event, rest 90 minutes to 2 hours, and do another one. Also, tactically manage the energy. So you want to be going there. You want to be pushing this thing. But you can't, similar to what we talked about with the strength test, you can't put all your eggs in one basket and go balls to the wall on workout 1 and expect to have anything left for workout 4 or 5 at the end of the day. So teaching the client that thing is going to be key. So series, important. Mixed, again, important. Yes, we know how we develop skill. So what is the skill level required? We develop skill in isolation first, and then we add fatigue and challenge the skill. That would be just general training, right? General challenge. But when we're pointing this towards sport, it's a definite requirement. We need to take the skills from an isolated setting, and they need to withstand the challenge and pressure of non-complementary fatigue. So these are movements that aren't going to be friends. Things like toes to bar and rope climbs. Things like toes to bar and front squats. Things like dumbbell snatches and kipping handstand press-ups, etc., etc., etc. Things like assault bike and wall balls. Things like assault bike deadlifts, box jumps. We know how all those feel together. They're non-complementary. And so at some point within training, and we'll talk about the phases, we need to move the challenge of the skill away from isolation and into these fatigue settings. So the order would go isolation, push breath work. Again, we go through this in FFC. Isolation, push breath work. Isolation, breath work, complementary fatigue. So those would be movements that don't interfere too much. All the while on all of these sections, you're building out the volume. And then you would finish off then with non-complementary fatigue. So the mixed element is key. Varied, we don't know. Now, that doesn't mean that training has to be chaos. It does mean that over time, the client should be aiming to develop a solid fitness IQ, and we'll go into that in a little bit more detail shortly. That means that they're ready, and this sounds cliche, they're ready for anything, as in, say the workouts are released 2, 3, maybe a week before the competition. They look at those things and they know how they're gonna perform them. They know how they're gonna break the movements down. They know how they're gonna get their best time out of it. Maybe they test a few of them, but they still have a sense of how that's gonna go down. So the client being ready for that variety is important. You would see some more chaos being injected in the program design the closer you get to the actual competition. So general principle, further away from competition, the less training looks like the sport. Closer to competition, the more training looks like the sport. Tests of strength, power, and metabolic capacity. So there is strength element. We mentioned that. What are the loads involved? What are the tests involved? Generally speaking, in fitness racing competitions, there are at least one strength test, heavier test. What can you get? What's the load you can shift for this movement? Okay. Power. There's definitely a requirement for power. Trying to move these things quickly. And then the metabolic capacity, of course. We want to be able to manage that threshold. We want to be able to push that threshold. And we'll talk about the energy systems that are involved in that. Just a sec. So, description. Just a minute. I've just got. Just give me 1 sec, please. Sorry. So, it described what's the USP? So I'm looking at the competition. What is it all about? What's its thing? Kind of similar to what it's known for. What are the KPIs? So we're talking about performance indicators here. Again, this can then link back to the client as a reverse engineering. What's required? What do the tests mean? Again, linking back to the timeframes, the loads involved, the movements involved, it gives us some idea. But generally speaking, as we know, these fitness competitions will have a feel about them. They'll have a style. And then what's the demographic? Is it inclusive? Is it a qualification process? Therefore, is the standard higher? Etc., etc. KPIs. Same as Hyrox, movement quality is key. Standard across all fitness competitions. Why is movement quality key? Because the definition of success is to aim to make complex dynamic contractions aerobic. The only way you can do that is by having movement quality in place. So it's efficiency of movement. As it says there, muscle endurance is key. We can't have muscle endurance without movement quality. We can't extend the volume of something that's inefficient. It will break down. The movement will break down. So same principles as Gen Pop when they're not even thinking about competing. We go after the skill first. That's the foundation of the whole shooting match. And at the other end of the spectrum, it's all we're left with at the end of the day. So movement quality is super important. Their peak potential. So however long they're planning to compete, if they're going after some sort of max potential at some point, that will depend on the quality of movement, how coordinated those movements are, and how efficient those patterns are. We know that, right? We know that. Whether that's a voluminous test, as in max amount of chest to bar or toes to bar, or whatever else the movement might be, thrusters, whatever. Our ability to do more of them is going to depend on the quality and the coordination. Same as the top end absolute strength contractions. Our ability to lift more is going to be governed not only by our will and our absolute strength, but by our capacity, our coordination, and our efficiency of movement. So it's super important. I put that first because it kind of jars with where everybody goes. And I'm not saying you, but where participants go in their will, I guess, to get good with good intentions. But they go after the spicy intensity. I just need to manage this high end of capacity. I just need to get used to this. So they develop this capacity, but then when they get to competition, the whole thing breaks down. And you can see it a mile off. You can stand up. If you go to a fitness competition, stand back and watch what's going on. Not just the people that you've coached. Watch everybody. And you'll be able to see who's done the work and who hasn't. And when I say done the work, put the time and effort into the skill. Because at some point, if that's not being in place, the skill will break down. The movement quality will break down and it'll leave them wanting. So as everybody else is carrying on, they'll have to stop. The brain will say no. We're aiming to get these skills to the point where they're unconsciously competent. We don't think about them, but they're good. They just happen, no matter how fucked we are, within reason. Capacity. From a metabolic point of view, we need a big base of aerobic. With that definition of success of trying to make the complex dynamic contractions aerobic, we need a big base of aerobic. So not only do we need movement quality, we need flow capacity. If we're going to push that flow capacity, so if we go back to the multi-event days, the multi-day events and the series of tests through one day, we're going to try and go as fast as we can, but then not die, so that we can recover between events and go again. We've probably felt it ourselves, right, in fitness competition, where we go too hard and perhaps in one or two, and it tends to be the way, right? They're programmed as such, so the first piece or the second piece is a spicy fucker. And it takes it out of you. And you get to the afternoon and you get on the dance floor and you're like, oh my God, I got nothing. And the whole plan unravels. So we managing that effort. It requires solid knowledge of threshold, but it also requires over time great capacity within the threshold. So whilst there's aerobic, there's also a requirement for the spicy stuff. And we'll talk about what that looks like the closer we get to competition. There's a requirement for strength. So the weighted elements, not just the weighted elements in the capacity test, but also the strength test, the weight tests. Now, the name that always comes to my mind when I think about this is
Intimidate cow.
Just a sec.
I fully don't rattle.
Folks, can you just make sure you mute? Mute all. There we go. So Briggsy wasn't blessed with natural strength. She was strong. She was strong for her size and stature, but was never at the top end. And never really got there as the sport sort of evolved as she was moving through it. So it was always like a few steps ahead of her. But still won the CrossFit Games. Still went to the CrossFit Games however many times. I can't remember. 8, 9, 10 times. I don't know. Top 10 most of those times. Because she managed her efforts accordingly. She did what she could in the strength stuff. She got as strong as she could within reason as an adequate priority piece within her training. But she didn't put all her eggs in that one basket. She realized that her strengths were actually her capacity. So she could be really fucking good at the capacity stuff. So what she didn't do is take away from what she was really good at to try and bring up something that she wasn't too good at. She kept that really good and just did what she could with this and sort of managed that scenario. Now, of course, she's particularly talented unicorn. And so probably a bit more wiggle room than most. But it's just to say that we have to prioritize these things carefully. And we have to do that with the client in collaboration with them. We've mentioned it a couple of times already, but fitness IQ. If you've done FFC, and I see a few faces that are either on it or have done it before, we know that flow, so aerobic capacity, and flow is our name for it, is skill-based and pacing is the skill. And it's the same for fitness competition. Pacing is the skill for the capacity tests. So that's the fitness IQ that's required. And it's not only required at the start before the event to look at it and get a sense for what that pace is going to feel like, whether it's a shorter pace that's, you can maintain this, or it's a longer piece that it's a little slower. But also when you're in it, like, how is this actually feeling? Maybe you started a little hot because the adrenaline got the better of you. And a couple of them went out sharpish and you chased them. And then you had to hang on. But again, only through knowledge of your own pacing and your higher fitness IQ there would you be able to manage that scenario accordingly and stay calm and not die. So pacing is critical, a critical element in this. To the next point, decision-making and intuition. I think it was Mike Tyson who said, you have the best plan in the world until you get punched in the face. And it's similar in fitness racing. You have it all laid out, how you're going to break these things down, how you're going to transition. And then when you get on the dance floor, for whatever reason, it just doesn't play out like you had it in your mind. At that point, you need to be equipped with the experience and the confidence to make the call. I know I was going to break these toes to bar down in 2 sets of 15. But actually, as I'm doing that, as I'm working towards 15, they're feeling harder than normal. So I'm going to go 3 10s actually and make that call. The inexperienced or the person that's attached to that rigid plan will, in their head, they'll have failed. Whereas the person with the higher fitness IQ, it's just like, well, this is today and I'm going to manage it accordingly. Not to worry, let's carry on. I thought 215s, that's not the case. And that might be because you haven't tested a series of tests across a day. So one test on its own for 30 toes to bar, 215s, and then into a load of other stuff is absolutely fine. But you didn't factor in the fact that you've done a maximum strength test just before it and a shit storm as the first piece. And so you're the third piece in and you're feeling a bit fragile. Again, decisions are required. This comes to the competition continuum. Again, we tabled this as high rocks. We mentioned it just before. Unconscious incompetence. That's not knowing what you don't know. So that's the blind, right? That's where there's an air of confidence, but only because you don't know. It's like, seems all right. I think I can do that. I'm looking forward to it. Then you walk in the room. That's conscious incompetence. Now you know what you don't know. That's the, shit. There's more to this than I thought. That's where, if we're not careful, anxiety can take over. It's like, holy shit. And then as coaches, then we need to manage that. Don't worry about it. Remember, we're just prioritizing this thing. Having conversations like, don't worry, this is your first competition, or this is your second competition ever. And you're this age and, maybe you've got quite a few more years working towards what is a maximum physical potential. This is just part of the process. Don't worry. Manage that conscious incompetence accordingly. Where the fitness IQ comes in then is probably in and around that conscious competence. Like, okay, so to Briggs's point, I know what I'm good at. I also know what I'm not good at. And therefore, again, I'm going to manage my calls accordingly. I know what I've got left in the tank as far as the whole event is concerned, not just one test. And therefore, I know I can push this a little and it'll be okay for the last test. Or I'm going to, you know, maybe I'm going to take a fly at this and go all in on this test. I'm feeling good. And then we'll see how the last test goes and it'll be a learning experience. But again, that's into that conscious competence. And then at the end there, that unconscious competence, you just do it. It's just a natural thing. They don't even think about the decisions that they're making when they look at a workout. They just see it and know it. Like, they look at a workout and go, I know how that's going to go down. I know exactly how that's going to feel. I've practiced this and I know that feeling 1,000 times. So this is linked to the fitness IQ. And again, we need to manage our own expectations and the client's expectations accordingly. We're trying to guide them that way. Understanding that progress along this line takes time, and as well, progress is not just one way. So without practice, we go back the way. So you don't reach a level and then save it on your computer and go, I don't have to go back and do that level again. No. If we're not practicing, we'll step back. Client's potential to adapt. Resilience. How resilient are they? Not that we'll know too much from a scientific and an objective point of view, but genetics play a part here. Okay. How they're made up. So this is just fact of the matter. What's in them? But then how they manage that is going to be in and around lifestyle and stress load. So that's the nature versus nurture. What can we do? What can we do most with? Well, the lifestyle piece. And as it happens, if we look after the nurture side, the nature side is upgraded. So the genetic expression is upgraded as a result of quality nurture and lifestyle. So their potential to be more resilient is increased. So don't just weigh it all on genetics. Always try and upgrade the shooting match with quality lifestyle also. And we know that, right? When we look at the best athletes, they have this shit dialed in. They sleep, they optimize for quality sleep. They optimize for quality food. They optimize for great hydration, great rhythm, great timing, great relationships, great balance through the day of that which matters and that which doesn't, as in they don't do a lot that doesn't. Also with the potential to adapt. It's not just their resilience, they have to be willing. They have to be willing to adapt. They have to be willing to go there. So we talk about at March On, the effort is the only currency. So it has to be intentional. Therefore, there has to be an alignment with this thing. It can't just be because somebody else is doing it or it seems cool. Because when it gets down to the nitty-gritty and this stuff gets hard, and we're talking about sport here, so we're moving away from health a little. You have to still be willing to go there. And that's a great conversation that you need to have with clients. For going after a max physical potential in this sporting arena, we're going to be moving away from health. Is that okay? It's going to be hard. It's probably not going to feel great all the time. In fact, when you're at the sharp end of the sword towards competition, you're probably going to feel pretty shit. And that's really where we want you to be. As daft as that sounds. So they have to be willing. That's going to be, it's a key requirement for adaptation. Okay. So where and how do we start with all that in mind? Well, we have to start with a client. Who plus what plus why equals how. So the who is them. Who are they? So we talked about the essence there. We talked about the genetics. We talked about their nature and nurture. So essence, experience. So what's gone before? What's their previous experience? What's their training age? What have they learned? How well have they learned? How far down the competency continuum are they? What's their current expression? As in, what does life look like for them today? That's the resources piece. Have they got time in the day to do this thing? Do they have the support? Does it link into that which matters most to them? That might be work, that might be family. Or does it take away from those things and it's going to be a continual battle? In which case, consistency is probably going to be low over time. So we need to check all these things on the who. The what then is the thing. What are we doing here? So this would be, we are working towards our best expression in this moment at this competition. That's what we're doing. And that's why programming around sport is a little easier, I would say, than programming for Gen Pop. Because it's more objective. It's like, well, this is the thing. Now, when we talk about the general athletic population, so those folk who are in between and they're doing this as somewhat of a hobby, we do have to manage both elements. They probably don't want to give up too much health, but they do want to go after some level of expression, higher expression than what they currently can do. And so there's probably a continual conversation that needs to happen around that. Again, based on their resilience, like what can they manage? How much is this impacting their health? How much is this draining from their resources? Therefore, how much is this adding stress? And then link into the last bit. Why? Why is probably the question that gets missed out, because it's the hardest to answer. Arguably, it's one of the most important. Because if intentions aren't clear from the client, they're doing it just because everybody's doing Hyrox at the moment, or everybody's doing Turf Games, or they only had 5 members in the team, they needed 6, so I said, why not? It seemed like I've been training for a while, so it seemed like something that I should do. If that's a goal that's borrowed, this probably isn't going to end well. So they need to be clear on the intentions. Now, this isn't to dissuade them, but in some way, shape, or form, through conversation, we should be challenging those intentions. Sense checking them, basically, like we should do with our own intentions, our own beliefs, our own values over time, continuing to challenge them. Because back to the will piece, when it starts to get tough, if that intent isn't clear, they're probably not going to do it. And therefore, the competition is going to be more like survival, just participation. And we know how that feels, right? It's not a fun game to play when you're miles off the competition. So those three things combined, who plus what plus why, that equals the prescription. So the prescription is spat out the other side. It's a result of, not the other way around. So it shouldn't be, this is my template for how to get good at this competition. Follow this. Now, fixed competitions like Hyrox are probably more or closer down that continuum to that thing. Further down that continuum. Where we can say that, look, this is how you get good at Hyrox. Slot yourself in accordingly somewhere along the line, because the thing's fixed. But when we're talking about mixed, and we're talking about a multitude of skills and a multitude of capacities, a multitude of paces that we've got to learn, there's a process, and it's going to be individual. Now, can people learn from a templated program? Of course they can. Of course they can. It's still good stuff. But is that going to optimize for their peak performance at that particular point in time? There's probably still going to be some things left on the table. So, think about investigating. We talked about the client intention. Is it just for participation? Is it just for fun? Or are we talking about performance? And that's key. As we've just mentioned, when we move to sport, it becomes more rigid, moves away from health. And then the reasons for both. Are they their own or are they borrowed? Again, clarity there. Like, what does this mean to you? Forget the expectations of everybody that in the gym that does this thing or whatever it might be. What is the definition of client success? We can't assume or project our own. But this is the alignment piece, aligned with intentions. It'll also help us establish the starting point. So once we've got the starting point, we can work from there. But be very, very careful that we don't project our own version of what this success looks like. What is the start point? So have they got previous comp data? Have they done this particular competition before? Which would be a great insight as to where they're up to. However, if it's the first time, again, we're looking at that experience piece, training age, training level, so competence. Specific skills, have they got them? Specific volume, functional volume of the competition. So can they play the game? If not, if they still want to do it and they haven't got those things, then their primary aim is getting through the day, not necessarily adding in any paces or intensity. It's just accumulating the stuff. Arguably, when we're talking about fitness competitions, now there are levels of, and this is the great thing today, there are levels of fitness competitions. There are more inclusive competitions and less inclusive competitions. If they're at the lower end of skill acquisition, capacity, volume, etc., etc., give them a more simple game to play. It's not meaningful playing in a game with people who are 10 times better than us. We know that. It's no fun. Think about the Sunday League player trying to play in the Premiership. They're not going to get much of a game. There's no challenge. Just getting run around. Same the other way. From experience from my competition back in the day, which was a level set. It was for different levels of individuals. But we used to get more experienced. So there was a standards test which give you a ranking in the number of people that participated across the weekend. And we used to get more experienced, competent people sandbagging the tests so that they could win the lower levels. And you could see it a mile off. Like their skills, their capacity, their volume that they'd accumulated over the years was miles ahead of who they were competing against. They thought that was going to be the thing that made it fun for them. But actually, they come off at the end of it and they're like, yeah, that was a bit shit, actually. I didn't enjoy that. There was no competition. Of course, I added, and you look like a wanker. But to that, we're looking to try and find that game that we can play. And when we say that we can play, it means that we can actually compete in the thing. Right? Now, if that's not available in the fitness competition that your client would like to do, again, it's a genuine conversation to have. It's not dissuading them. It's just arming them. The fact that you're quite far away from this at the moment, and I know it's just a sign-up thing, but I'm not sure how much fun it's going to be for you right now. Like that's just a general conversation. Like, what do you think about that? Here are the skill levels, and this is where you're at. How about we run some of the tests and see how they feel in the gym here before we actually sign up for the thing? That sort of thing. To the point of performance testing. Specific to the comp of choice. So this goes back to the KPIs, this goes back to the what's it known for, time of test, etc., etc. It's pointless testing a 60 to 90 minute Hyrox type test as a metric or a line in the sand if the competition that your client wants to sign up for is actually made up of 4 to 5 tests of 8 to 12 minute threshold pieces. There's nothing to be taken from one or the other. 60 to 90 minute test ain't going to tell you much about their capacity in an 8 to 12 minute shitfest. So test accordingly. But then test in relation to where the client's starting, right? Now, I've done this plenty of times with people who didn't know, usually guys, nothing against guys, but it was just their mindset, their left brain mindset of outcome based. I'm just going to get there. And I'm going to do it somehow. I'll figure it out. I'm going to get there. But their aspirations were a little too lofty based on where their current skills sat. So we give them some guided failure in a performance test, as in we use the tests of the actual event and the times. So this is what the top 10 of this competition got last year. Let's see how you fare. Let's see how we go. Can we do that? And then we can make a call. As they come out the other side, it's like, yeah, okay. I'm 6 minutes slower. It's like, yeah, okay. It's not even on the same floor, right? Now, of course, you do it in a sensitive manner. But that's where those performance tests can be used to, again, increase awareness to upgrade intentions. So that's where previous comp workouts can work well as a reality piece. It's like, look, this is where we're up to. So let's take the next step forward rather than trying to get all the way there and creating a load of compensations along the way. There will be some capacity tests that sit within there. But again, that's going to be related to the competition that you're looking at. If it's an individual test, if it's an individual competition, that's probably going to look a little bit different to what a team workout would be. However, many team competitions today see everybody doing the same thing in synchro, right? So it used to be that it was like a you go, I go. So team workouts used to be get people really fit at short, sharp blasts with rest in between. Like, you go, they go, you've recovered, go again. So get your individuals really fit at that. The reality of team pursuits now is that each individual has to be good. So really, even for team events in fitness competitions, all the individuals need to be of a certain level. Again, similar sort of scenario. It's no fun being the weak link in that picture. And if you've ever been in that scenario, it's grim. You're hanging on for dear life the whole way along. It's not your pacing. You're being dragged by somebody else to keep up. And then they're waiting for you. And then they get rest whilst they're waiting for you. So then when they start again, they go even faster. If you're slowing down, horrible place to be. So similar thing, like choose the team wisely. It needs to be in a team who are of a similar level. One, so that, there are certain members of the team that aren't bearing the burden of that they can do more of, but also so that there are no necessarily weak links and everybody can kind of keep up. But capacity tests in and around those things are super insightful for us as coaches and them as athletes. To the point, why investigate? To establish and then prioritize which qualities require development for this particular client. It's not good enough to say that these are the KPIs for the event, and therefore these are the things that we need to work on. That might be something that you consider, of course, but it should still come back to the who, what, why equals how. It's what's the next step of challenge for this client. And then you're managing expectations accordingly. Okay? Does that make sense? So then what? Well, we have to integrate. I'll run through this quickly. This is just standard principle stuff. Establish priorities, that we just talked about. So we define a start point, we define the goal, or we create a feedback loop around from the goal. We organize the outcomes of what we've investigated. So all the information that we gathered, we create a pattern. The pattern is the program design. And then we think about how we're going to progress that over time. We establish the time frame. So we reverse engineer from the comp date to now. It creates a camp, if you like. This is comp prep, and this is where it starts. So what are the priorities? So to the point before, are we working towards accumulating the functional volume to start with? Are we just participating, or are we playing with intensities? Are we pushing this thing and trying to get fitter, better? Outline the plan. So this is where phases of training do come into account. Accumulation, intensification, pre-comp, and comp are the four. Just general sporting periodization. Nothing fancy here. We'll go through what they mean shortly. So where this matters less in Gen Pop, because as we know, life tends to create the ups and downs and peaks and troughs of intensities in training. And we should be agile as coaches to facilitate that and work with it. As we're working towards a fixed sporting goal, and when I say fixed, I mean the time frame, not necessarily the content. There's some shit we got to do. So if we're gonna express ourselves to the best of our abilities on that day, there's a process we need to work through. So how do we progress that? At what rate? What's the type of progress? So again, back to the point, client-centric. What are we defining as progress right now? So it might be at this stage, this is your first or second competition. It's your first year of competing. So it might be that together you've decided that success for your client might be improvement of gymnastic skills under fatigue. So the first time they went and competed, or perhaps the first tests you did, you saw a big breakdown in movement quality as fatigue carried on. So it might be by the end of this year, and we're not aiming to win this thing, but what I'd like to do is come out of the event with much more confidence around my gymnastic expressions. Maybe it's strength, maybe it's a capacity piece, whatever it might be. But you create almost like a goal within the goal. So let's define that for the client rather than the only goal being winning, because only one person wins. So as much as we all want to win, it's like, what do we want to win at? And it's the same when we play football or any team sport. It's like, you're just aiming to win that one game, or are you aiming to win the season? And therefore it's a series of games over a period of time. And maybe it's win the league, you're aiming to win the league. So let's think about I Support Liverpool. When Jurgen Klopp came in, he never said he was going to win the league in the first season. It was like, we aim to win the league by a certain time. This is going to take time to build and progress. But what are the markers of success? What are the little goals, the little posts that we're putting in along the way that we can aim ourselves at and orient the journey? That's the metrics, how we're measuring it. So we mentioned it before. What is the truest expression of fitness racing? Mainly, it's making dynamic complex contractions aerobic. That's the main thing. That's what makes up the majority of fitness racing. What do we mean by that? It means that the skills within are repeatable and maintainable. They don't break down. Whether that's an 80-kilo power snatch, whether it's a bar muscle up, whether it's a burpee, as stupid as that sounds, watch the shift, watch your competitions, watch the change of burpee technique in people as they gradually die, because they've no skill in pacing and they've low movement quality in the burpee, because everybody thinks everybody should be able to do a burpee. Rather, what is a burpee? It's dynamic push-up. Needs earning. You're going to create volume in that. If you watch these things break down, that's where you're not going to do your best. Plus, there's some requirement for threshold capacity. Plus, there's some requirement for absolute strength. We've mentioned that. So we know that carefully placed anaerobic work will enable us to flirt with that threshold somewhat more than if we don't do it. Okay? So in a sport setting, the anaerobic pieces, so when we get closer to the sport, when we get closer to competition, we should start sprinkling that thing in, going through that in a minute. So, phases of training. First up, accumulation. Biggest aim, biggest focus, aerobic base. So time in flow, so time spent. We should be practicing skills, refining movement, refining pacing. Those two things together, it should ring true in your mind. Okay, if we're going to be practicing skills and refining movement, there's a definite requirement for all our capacity work to be aerobic. Because if we're not, that's going to take away from our ability to ingrain those new skills. So what does aerobic work do? It gets more oxygen delivered to the brain, equals more neural plasticity, equals more ability to handle new skills. Win. Meanwhile, what does anaerobic work do? The opposite. How useful is that for refining skills? It isn't. So in accumulation, we should be staying away from anything too spicy. We should be developing muscle endurance. So we should be building out volume. So depending on where the skills sit for your individual, whether you're on that competency continuum, you can manage this accordingly. But let's talk to the more experienced client who's done this a few times, has got some solid training age in the tank. We're aiming to push this volume now, and we're able to challenge the fatigue. So their muscle endurance work might look a little bit more like the sport than the beginner, but still the paces within it are less than. It's less intense, but they can now manage the fatigue around the muscle endurance pieces. Either way, we're looking to stretch the volume out. And of course, in accumulation, we're looking to develop strength where required. That, and when I say where required, that's in relationship to the actual competition and what is required, and the client and where they currently stand. So what's the gap between the two, and then how can we go some way to closing that? That's accumulation. Again, strength. So as we call that form in PFCA world, form and flow are best buds. They work well together. That's the creatine phosphate system and the aerobic system. Work well. Add in the middle piece, the glycolytic piece, anaerobic, the sugary stuff. Takes away from the other two. So again, mindlessly going after high intensity in an accumulation phase is gonna result in a lower outputs at the top end, despite effort, despite your effort, just misguided. Intensification, then we move into this. It should be intensive, so it should be more intensive. It should be particularly more focused, so we're getting more sport specific here. We should be looking to coordinate systems. So what that means is the skills and pieces and volume that we've built out and refined in accumulation, we now start to put them all together. So as we say, it's starting to look a bit more like the sport, in which case, depending on the individual and depending on their ability, it can start to be a little more chaotic. Make less sense from a S&C progression point of view, if you like things that you would never put together. We know these fitness competitions are programmed. Basically think of the most random shit that you put together and give it a whirl. You're probably not going to be far away from it. So the purpose of the intensification phase is to check. It's a feedback loop around the outcome of the accumulation phase. Because if you haven't ingrained movement quality, practiced the functional volume, developed muscle endurance, developed strength, as we add intensity, those things will start to break down. So in the Hyrox webinar that we did last month, somebody asked, I tend to get little niggles and pain when I move into intensification. That's a great example of a feedback loop around a poor accumulation phase. Or we're going too much. We're doing too much too soon. We're rushing the process. So we're looking to increase the intensity. That doesn't mean balls to the wall. It needs to be relative. And as we say there, it needs to be more sport specific. Pre-comp then, so we're right up against the competition. So this would be, a couple of weeks out. This is shouting the axe, confidence building. At this point, you want to be gassing your client up. So don't be handing them their ass at this point. They're not going to get any fitter here. So this is refinement, okay? So it's pointless you doing what you did in the performance test where you see where they stand in relation to the current, requirements of the sport. That's gone. That opportunity to do that's gone. Now in this phase, gas them up with what they've got. Make them feel confident. Make them feel good about themselves. Because when they get to competition, as I say, they're not going to get any fitter in this period. Plus, confidence built here, that mental game in competition, in and around the fitness IQ will probably be the difference between one, enjoying it and not enjoying it, and actually fulfilling their potential for that day. So help them get there with the confidence piece. Practice. So this is probably going to be like practice pieces of the sport. And then a big piece here is the intensity is particularly high here is managing recovery. So volume should be quite low. And again, an explanation there to the client. Look, these next 2 weeks, intensity is going to be quite high. We're going to be doing some very sport-specific things. We're going to be practicing some of the stuff that we've put together in the previous 2 phases. You're going to be gaining loads of confidence. This is going to be feeling really good for you. But we need to focus on recovery. Because when we get to game day, I want you to be good to go. And then we go into the comp. So we've mentioned the importance of the aerobic piece and really it defining success in fitness racing. But I tabled this in the Hyrox piece. Think about it as teaching the body to be as efficient as possible for a long period of time. And look at this, and eventually increasing the speed across months and years. So putting pressure on the client or the client putting pressure on themselves for like this to be the only competition that they're ever going to do, and it needs to be their best expression ever. Like, no. This is just part of it. Don't worry. And so then these phases of training, that accumulation forms the foundation of the whole thing. Just general principles. However long the comp plus pre-comp plus intensification phase, the accumulation phase needs to be at least that long. So if the intensification phase is maybe 3 to 4 weeks, the pre-comp phase is 1 to 2. So let's say 3 weeks intensification, 2 weeks pre-comp, and then the competition. So we've got 5 weeks. The accumulation phase needs to be at least 5 weeks. But always more so if possible. Because think about the nature of it. Refining skills, building capacity, building strength. It's the basis of your expression or the client's expression on that particular day. So the more we can do there, as they say, as the saying goes, the broader the base, the higher the peak. The opposite is also true. Of course, what we generally see is that switch round. Maybe accumulation phase for a lot of people looks like the week after the previous competition, where they just take it relatively steady. And then they're straight back into handing themselves their ass. So their periodization model actually looks like this. And again, watch people in competition. You'll be able to see it because their stuff will break down. Skills will break down. Strength will break down. Recovery between tests will break down. Not to judge, but just as an interest piece for yourself, just sort of, I guess, clarify what we're talking about here. Okay. In most cases, this competition will not represent your client's expression of their max physical potential. Manage expectations accordingly. This is part of the process. We've mentioned this a couple of times, but it is key. Ultimately, we want to go and enjoy this thing. And most of our clients won't be getting paid for this. Most of our clients will have paid to do it. Probably bought a new pair of Metcons as well, you know. Use some new kit from Lululemon. You know the drill. So at least let's go and enjoy it. So again, managing the expectations. What are we looking to get out of this competition? And as we start thinking about competitions like that, we move away from the tendency today to continue to do competitions in order to get better at them. So when we start to think about what we're actually defining as success, we realize that we can't get that from competition. Again, the opposite is true. So a lot of people today enjoy the buzz from competition, which we get. We can't be surprised at that, of course. It's fantastic. But they then just do more of it. So they test more than they train. Again, we see it in Hyrox. Every weekend, a lot of Hyroxers are doing a Hyrox sim. Like, how do you expect to get any better? Rather, if we can define success in relationship to the client, like what are you looking to get out of this competition? Never mind winning it. What's success for you? Then we can start to place each competition on a continuum over time. And then we can also return back to, from a feedback loop point of view, okay, if that's what we're defining as success, how long do we think, realistically speaking, that's going to take to build and accumulate from where you are now? Because it's not going to be, we just said, right? We just said the accumulation phase needs to be at least the same length of time as the intensification plus pre-comp plus comp. So if we remove the accumulation phase, we remove the skill building, we remove the capacity building, we remove the strength building, those elements are the essence of the whole thing. How can we expect to get better? We can't. So there's an education piece there, which links to this. Teaching your client how to train will maximize their athletic potential. We say this all the time. This is Josh's quote. Josh Davies. But the higher your client's fitness IQ from the education that you've worked through together, not only the better expression they're going to have on competition weekend, but also the better prep that they're going to get each time. Because the process is going to mean more to them. It'll all start to make sense. Yeah. I know, like in that final, on that last event, those bar muscle ups breaking down on rep 8 when I only have to do 10 is going to fucking haunt me forever. But I know that I didn't really do the work in accumulation. So the process on this next time, I'm going to accumulate the shit out of those bar muscle ups, right? But again, they realize the importance of the phases of training. They realize the importance of the intention within each phase. The focus on everything else that sits outside of the expression piece, the other side of the coin that we speak to in FFC and level 3 and all across our systems. The nurture piece. Super important. Especially if we're going to manage how far away from health our client is going to go. In sport, in actual sport, where people are getting paid, it's work, it's vocation for those athletes. The best coaches in the world still do their best to try and manage the client's health. Not only for best performance over a long period of time, so resilience and therefore longevity in the sport, but also for life beyond the sport. Because as we know, in sport, and this is a key thing, the higher the peak, the faster the fall. So if we're doing nothing to manage health within that time where we're going after the peak, the fall is going to be so steep and so hard. And I'm sure we know people who've been there and done that. So, generally speaking, we're talking about making this whole thing aerobic. Therefore, we should be teaching the body to be as efficient as possible for a long period of time and eventually increasing speed across the months and years. So every time we build capacity, every time we learn deeper about our pacing, there's an opportunity then to do the thing faster. So our pace for an 8-minute piece that used to be this is now this. That's not forced. The output is still the same. Just a sec. I've got something else coming up that I just want to share. So that means that we must train at our own aerobic paces and gradually increase them over time, not continually test them. To what I was just saying. This is key. True flow expression requires maintenance of power output at a repeatable pace. So in training, that means low work to rest ratios. true force expression, so that's anaerobic, requires maintenance of power output. See that? So even in the shitty stuff, we still want to, in training, we still want to see maintenance of power output, but it's at a non-repeatable pace. So it means that beyond the time frame that you're working in, it will drop off. And to enable you to train that properly and adequately, the rest periods increase. So the rest is higher than the work time, often much higher. Meanwhile, and this is what we see a lot of times today, aiming to express either with reducing power output is survival and is neither here nor there as far as its use in developing fitness. The higher the aerobic capacity, the greater your ability to express faster speeds and maintain them. So this goes back to this being a step, an iterative step in a broader process for the client. Your 12-minute pace might be such here, but the next few steps, it will get quicker. It will still be maintainable. It will still be a pace that will allow you to continue to express yourself up there near threshold in the next test within 2 hours. And so on and so on and so on. And just when you think about that, the potential tests, right? Is it 18 minutes? Is it 22 minutes? Is it 12 minutes? Is it 8 minutes? Is it 4 minutes? Is it 3 minutes? Is it 30 minutes? They're all different paces. And if we've not been through a progression over and over again to continue to refine that pace and therefore move faster in that scenario, it won't be maintainable on the day. And that's where, so all the way back to the start, it's important for us to try and understand exactly what the client's going to be in for as far as the pacing on the timeframes that they're going to be working at or within. Because we're at least focusing our attention then. So even if it's between 12 and 20 minutes, that means that it's not 2 and it's not 4 minutes, but it's still not 30 or 25. So you've still got something to aim at rather than trying to do everything. And we know how that ends up. It's difficult to prioritize them. I'm done. Any questions?
Hi, Craig. I've got a question about the accumulation phase. When you say about practicing skills, my head goes to, I don't know, take, for example, muscle ups. If you can't do a muscle up, that would then be practicing the skill of learning a muscle up. But let's say, take, for example, toes to bar, you can already do toes to bar. How would that look in practicing skills?
Great question. So, back to principles. When we've not achieved a skill yet, we have to start at the beginning. So no matter our competence, so you might be super competent in toes to bar, in chest to bar, in various other skills, but you can't do this one skill.
Mm-hmm.
The skill that you can't do, it has to start back at motor control. But for complex skills like the muscle up, we also need to break that thing down. And when I say break it down, I don't necessarily mean break it down into, false grip ring rows into turnover and practicing the skill of the transition, etc., etc. I'm talking about thinking what the prerequisites for that skill are. Because if we don't do that, we're in the murky waters of having our client continually try the skill, but without the strength or coordination required to manage it. And we know how that looks because it happens over and over again. That's oh, you were so close. I think you'll get it next time. Oh, and then, they get it and it looks like a fucking dog's dinner. But it's like, yay, you got your muscle up. And you know, it's like, fuck, that was a fluke. But I know you're going to keep trying. And where's that end up? They end up in the physio room.
Yeah.
That's it, right? So we break it down. What's required for a muscle up? A solid, so depending on, so let's go purist. Start with the strip movement. So false grip's required. So strengthen forearms and wrists to enable the false grip to hold that position. Strict chest to ring with a real deep pull is required. So we need to be able to get the rings all the way down here. We need to work on the skill of the transition. We need to have a dip from the deepest position. So the fullest range of a dip. So we need all those as a prerequisite. And then we go, okay, client, where are you at? Where are you at? It's like, okay, well, I've got 3 strict pull-ups. It's like, well, that's fine. But now we know where we need to go. So you can write out the progress then. So from the 3 strict pull-ups, we probably need to accumulate more strict pull-ups in order to then increase the range of those pull-ups to chest to bar. When we get to chest to bar, we can work on chest to ring. When we get to that point, we can probably start working on false grip, and so on and so on and so on. But then we can create, and this is what I'm talking about, we're creating a pattern and progress. So you're creating program design then around that stuff. So then you can be honest with the client and say, look, this might be a couple of years' work. Are you cool with that?
Yeah.
Rather than what most of the fitness industry do and go, I've got just the fucking trick up my sleeve that can get you a muscle up. Right? And it's like, no, you're a liar because you don't know. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Now, the client might progress quicker than you think. Excellent. But at least let's be honest and go through the process, because then when you set them up for success with those prerequisites in that complex movement, what can they do beyond that? Well, they can start to link more together. So then when we talk about building out the skill of the muscle up, when we talk about adding volume, if the skill hasn't been formulated properly, as soon as we start challenging it under fatigue, so volume, it will break down. Simple as that. So then you get to the point in the coach's mind where you think it's actually pointless trying to rush this, because I need this client to be able to. So if they're doing a CrossFit competition of a certain level, right, and that's where they want to get to. Again, this is managing their expectations over time. Like, cool, that's a good aim. It might be doing something like strength in depth at some point in time. I don't know, whatever it might be. Let's aim for that in 2 years. But we've got all this work to do in the meantime, which is really cool. And in the meantime, we can go and do that competition, which doesn't require us to do muscle ups. And we can do this and that and the other. So we formulate this plan. But at some point, that individual is going to need to do a functional volume of muscle ups. And it's probably going to be in around 30 to 40 of those repetitions in isolation before you start fatiguing it.
Yeah.
Right? So just think about the work that's involved and then reverse engineer it all the way back. Does that make sense now?
Yeah. Thank you.
No worries. So again, from a periodization point of view, think about how many accumulation phases are required for that individual to get from where they are to 30 muscle ups under fatigue. It's a lot of time, which is great. And this is the thing. There's no rush. Let's enjoy that. Let's enjoy the steps. Let's enjoy getting the first muscle up and it looking an absolute diamond, because they can. It's like, was that right, coach? She's like, looks good. Looks good. Well done. Jump down. Take a rest. Let's get another one. Let's see if we can get 10 individual reps in today. Cool. Then let's see if we can get 15 individual reps in next week. Cool. 20. Cool. I wonder if we can link 2 together. Should we try that? Yeah, cool. Okay. Now can we do 8 2s? And so on and so on and so on. And you can sense and feel, right? It's like the client's going, this is fucking buzzing. I'm enjoying this. Rather than stuck beneath the rings, flailing around like I don't know what. Bless him. It's a great question, Nat. Thank you. Any others?
I've got one around kind of the pre-comp. So obviously you spoke about building confidence, sharpening the axe. How much would you kind of want them to deload before training?
Yeah,
before the comp, sorry.
Great question. Without wanting to cop out, it really does depend.
Yeah.
So some individuals really benefit from a taper. Other individuals really don't. So it can. So when we talked about in pre-comp, like a big element of that is going to be the mental side of things, like gassing them up and feeling good about themselves. Certain athletes will have a detrimental mental impact by not doing a lot before the comp, or doing too little. Like they'll feel ill prepared. So depends on the individual. Also depends on, I guess, how they're appearing at that point. Also taking into consideration and just thinking, something for us to think about. We might have fucked up as far as dosing. So it might have been either a little too intense and a little too voluminous, in which case they might be a bit burned and require more of a deload than usual. So you could start to see the sort of signs of that. Or the other way around. We might get them through pre-comp and they're still buzzing like they're still in accumulation. It's like, I've not got you there. So it's that management of don't peak too soon, but also we're aiming to get to the peak. Then layering on top the difference of individuals, what they enjoy. So this is a very reductionist thing to say, but just as a bit of an insight and something to think about. Probably more powerful naturally individuals, so higher NME individuals, from my experience, would benefit from more of a deload and a taper. Lower NME, more enduring individuals probably enjoy continuing to train in some way, shape, or form. But that week before, those weeks before training should always be like a lower volume anyway, right? And it's just almost like ticking over.
Yeah.
Again, and the chat to the client around all that stuff as an awareness piece for them is, you're not getting any fitter now. Don't worry. The work's done. The work's done. We're now literally just facilitating the peak.
Okay, nice. Thank you.
Hope that was helpful. I know it was a bit of a around the houses, but I think that's just one to play with over time.
Yeah. All right. Thanks.
Any others?
Hi, Craig. I know we're not supposed to mention turf games, but how important is it how important is it to practice with the worm beforehand? Like, we don't have one. How important would it be?
Yeah, so I just see like that as any other skill. So I know it's a weight. I know in theory, the movements can be carried out with any other load, right? But we know that there's a specific feeling and a specific sense with the worm. So with that in mind, I would suggest the more the better. Also, then if you think of the joined up nature of the team, literally at that point, like unless you've got some seriously high fitness IQ individuals who've got a lot of experience with worm, getting 4 people together or 3 people together on a worm and expecting it to go swimmingly without any practice is probably a bit of a pipe dream. So yeah, I would say it's probably required. And if you think about the I know there's categories within turf games like there are in a lot of competitions today, which is great. But if you think about even the highest order, they're still like general athletic population. They're not elite athletes, most of them. I know some come and have a play in the off season, but their skills aren't that refined, is what I'm trying to say. And so they'll always benefit from touch points on that thing, especially as a team, I would say. Any others? Are we good? Sweet. Thanks for your time. Hope that was useful. It actually made it easy for me to chat rather than being specific to that particular competition, because yeah, you can take that information and apply it across fitness racing. So my quick rehash of my notes, I think, was useful. As usual, any questions, you know where I am. Nice to see you all. Thanks for your time. I'll see you all soon.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.